West Africa, January 31st, 2025. Sirens echoed in the streets of Ouagadougou as armored vehicles escorted a foreign minister into the heart of Burkina Faso. She carried no weapons, no soldiers, only a single envelope. But inside that envelope was a message powerful enough to rattle Washington, Paris, and the entire United Nations. That minister was Sarah Bissolo Nyanti of Liberia. Her mission? Not to meet Joe Biden, not to bow before Emmanuel Macron, but to sit face to face with Captain Ibrahim Traoré, the 36-year-old soldier who expelled France, defied the West, and now dares to lead a Pan-African revolt. Think about it. Liberia, America's oldest ally in Africa, a country born from freed slaves, walked past Washington's doors and went straight to a man the Western press brands a dictator. Why? To beg for his support in winning a United Nations Security Council seat. This is not just diplomacy. This is betrayal of the old order. If Liberia sides with Traoré, it means the tide is turning. Coastal nations once tied to the Atlantic are now aligning with the Sahel's rebels. It means Washington could lose its most loyal foothold in Africa. And here's the chilling question. What happens when America's friends start choosing America's enemies? Because this is bigger than one vote at the UN. This is about whether Africa will keep taking orders, or finally rise as a bloc strong enough to defy the West. Stay with me, because the handshake in Ouagadougou may have just set off a chain reaction. And if you think the United States isn't watching, you're wrong. Satellites are already circling, analysts are already whispering, and generals are already drawing up contingency plans. So I ask you, is this the dawn of a new African century, or the beginning of America's worst nightmare in West Africa? When Sarah Bissolo Nyanti stepped out of her convoy in Ouagadougou, the air was thick with more than desert dust. Every camera, every microphone, every whisper in the capital carried the same question. Why had Liberia come here? On the surface, the answer seemed simple. Liberia was seeking Burkina Faso's endorsement for a non-permanent seat on the United Nations Security Council for the 2026-2027 term. But in reality, this was no ordinary campaign stop. For Liberia, this was a gamble, one that could redefine its place in the world. Let's remember who Liberia is. Founded in the 1800s by freed slaves from America, Liberia has always carried a special relationship with the West, especially Washington. During the Cold War, Liberia was a reliable partner. When civil war ripped the country apart in the 1990s, United Nations peacekeepers flooded in, many of them under American influence. For decades, Monrovia leaned on foreign aid, foreign troops, and foreign approval. But today, something has shifted. Liberia doesn't just want prestige. A UN Security Council seat is more than a trophy. It means influence on global conflicts, a chance to push African solutions on African issues. It means a platform to tell the world. Africa is not just a subject of foreign intervention. It is a player in shaping peace and security. And to win that seat, Liberia needs votes. Every African ally counts. But here's the shock. Instead of running first to Washington or Paris, Liberia knocked on Ibrahim Traoré's door. Why Traoré? Because he has become more than a head of state. Since 2022, this 36-year-old captain has captured the imagination of millions across Africa. He threw out French troops, tore up old security accords, and told the West that Burkina Faso would no longer be a client state. He didn't ask permission. He didn't negotiate quietly. He acted. And in doing so, he became a symbol for a generation of Africans tired of dependency and humiliation. That's why Liberia's move is so bold and so dangerous. By aligning with Traoré, Liberia is sending a signal. It is saying to the world, we are no longer begging for approval from old masters. We are looking to our own brothers. During the meeting in Ouagadougou, Foreign Minister Nyanti handed over President Boakai's letter and spoke directly about Liberia's hopes. She said this seat was not just for Liberia. It was for Africa, for young Africans who want to see their voices heard at the highest table of global diplomacy. And she asked Traoré to endorse their candidacy. But the conversation didn't stop there. Sources close to the talks reveal that Liberia went further, proposing deeper cooperation with the Alliance of Sahel States, the AES, the very bloc that broke away from ECOWAS under Traoré's leadership. Imagine the symbolism: a coastal democracy, long tied to Western donors, reaching out to a rebel-led Sahel alliance. For Traoré, this was proof that his defiance was working, that his model of sovereignty and solidarity was spreading. He reportedly told Nyanti, "This is not just about votes. This is about dignity, brothers and sisters defending the same soil." Across the continent, the news spread fast. Analysts in Lagos, Abidjan, and Dakar called it a political earthquake. If Liberia, once America's closest ally, was turning to Traoré, what would stop other coastal nations from following? And back in Monrovia, the story struck a chord. For many young Liberians, this wasn't just politics. It was validation, a statement that their country could chart its own course without waiting for Western approval. Student groups celebrated online, posting messages like, "We don't need Washington to dream big. We need Africa." But in Washington, Paris, and Brussels, the whispers grew darker. Was Liberia betraying its old partners? Was it legitimizing a military ruler condemned in Western media as a threat to democracy? Officials stayed quiet in public, but privately, concern spread. Liberia's outreach to Traoré could complicate U.S. influence, not just in Monrovia, but across West Africa. And so, what began as a single letter in an envelope has become much more. It is a test of loyalty, a challenge to old alliances, and a signal that Africa's political center of gravity is shifting toward leaders the West cannot control. But here's the question hanging in the air. Did Liberia just secure a powerful ally? Or did it just paint a target on its own back? The moment Liberia's request became public, the story exploded far beyond Ouagadougou. What many thought was a simple diplomatic visit suddenly turned into front-page news across Africa and raised alarm bells in Washington. Because this was no ordinary alliance. It was a collision of past wounds, present ambitions, and future risks. During her closed-door talks with Ibrahim Traore, Foreign Minister Sarah Bissolo Nyanti went further than expected. She didn't just ask for Burkina Faso's endorsement at the United Nations. She proposed hosting a regional security summit in Monrovia with the leaders of the Alliance of Sahel States, the AES. Think about that. Liberia, still a member of ECOWAS, the bloc long backed by Western powers, was openly offering to welcome the very alliance that had broken away in defiance. To some, this was madness. To others, it was genius. It signaled that Liberia wanted to become a bridge between coastal nations tied to the Atlantic and the Sahel states breaking free from colonial legacies. The response was immediate. In Bamako and Niamey, leaders of Mali and Niger applauded Liberia's courage. Commentators in Ghana and Nigeria, however, warned that Monrovia was playing with fire. The African Union remained cautious, urging Liberia not to abandon its traditional commitments. But the most powerful reaction came not from politicians, but from the people. On April 30th, 2025, thousands of young Liberians marched through Monrovia. Their banners were shocking: "Africa for Africans." In solidarity with Traoré. Sovereignty is not a crime. For a country once heavily dependent on UN peacekeepers, seeing its youth rally behind a military leader from another state was unprecedented. Social media lit up. Videos of the march spread across West African networks, sparking debates in homes, cafes, and parliaments. Why were young Liberians, born after their civil wars, inspired by Traoré? The answer is simple: authenticity. Traoré is seen as a man of action, not ceremony. He wears military fatigues, speaks in plain words, and confronts foreign powers without hesitation. For young Africans tired of scripted politicians, this is electrifying. One student group, the Liberia Young Leaders Alliance, even published an open letter praising Traoré's leadership. Their words were clear: "He is the Africa we want, sovereign, youthful, unafraid." But not everyone forgot history. During Liberia's brutal civil war in the 1990s, Burkina Faso under former President Blaise Compaoré was accused of fueling the conflict by supplying arms to warlord Charles Taylor. Many Liberians still remember that betrayal. And yet, in 2025, something remarkable happened. Instead of clinging to the past, Liberia extended a hand. It was a gamble on reconciliation, a bet that nations, like people, can change. By engaging Traoré, Monrovia was rewriting a painful chapter into one of cooperation. In the halls of Washington, the whispers grew urgent. Liberia was supposed to be America's safest ally in Africa, a foothold built over generations. Now that ally was courting a leader the U.S. has labeled dangerous, even destabilizing. Analysts at the Pentagon warned that Liberia's tilt toward Burkina Faso could embolden other coastal states. Think of Sierra Leone. Think of Guinea. If they followed Liberia's path, America's Atlantic presence could collapse like dominoes. For now, U.S. officials remained cautious. Publicly, they said nothing. Privately, concern turned into strategy. Surveillance over Liberia intensified. Western diplomats quietly pressed Monrovia to reconsider its path. And yet, on the streets of Monrovia, the sentiment was different. For the first time in decades, many Liberians felt their country was not simply reacting to outside orders, but choosing its own destiny. One marcher summed it up best: "We've begged enough. Now we stand." But here's the danger. By reaching for Traoré's hand, Liberia may have gained a powerful ally, or it may have just awakened the wrath of Washington. The question now is, can Liberia balance its bold new friendship with Burkina Faso without triggering the kind of foreign backlash that once tore it apart? When the dust settled after Liberia's bold outreach to Burkina Faso, the consequences began to ripple far beyond conference halls and press releases. What started as a diplomatic handshake quickly turned into a debate about survival, sovereignty, and the daily lives of ordinary people. In Ouagadougou, Traoré's government has long argued that true independence is impossible without economic control. During the talks, Liberia echoed that vision. Together, the two governments announced their intent to explore a new trade corridor, linking Burkina Faso's inland production zones directly to Liberia's Atlantic ports. For farmers in Burkina Faso, this meant something concrete: quicker routes to sell their harvest, fewer foreign middlemen taking the profits, and more jobs for local truckers and dock workers. For Liberian port workers, it promised steady business, more cargo ships, and new opportunities in shipping and logistics. But the move also carried political weight. By prioritizing African-to-African trade, both nations sent a message to the West. Africa will not remain a warehouse of raw materials for Europe and America. It will trade with itself on its own terms. Security was another pillar of the talks. Liberia has struggled for years with fragile institutions and porous borders. In contrast, Burkina Faso under Traoré has built a reputation for mobilizing local communities into defense forces and integrating intelligence networks across the Sahel. The proposed cooperation included joint training programs for Liberian security units, intelligence sharing agreements, and even the possibility of AES advisors visiting Monrovia. For Liberia's citizens, haunted by memories of past wars, the idea of strengthening self-defense, without depending solely on UN missions, sparked both hope and fear. Hope, because it suggested Liberia could finally stand on its own feet. Fear, because deeper ties with the AES could provoke retaliation from ECOWAS or Western allies. On the streets of Monrovia, opinions split sharply. Older generations who remembered the horror of the civil wars worried aloud. Are we inviting new conflict by angering the West? Meanwhile, the youth saw something different: dignity. One young activist put it plainly during a community forum: "We're not asking for permission anymore. If Burkina Faso can stand, why can't we?" His words drew applause from dozens of students, many of whom feel excluded from Liberia's traditional politics. Across both countries, cultural exchanges began to rise. Universities in Ouagadougou and Monrovia announced plans for joint programs on African governance. Women's associations discussed shared agricultural projects. Even musicians joined in, with Burkinabe rappers and Liberian drummers producing collaborative tracks under the banner "Africa for Africans." But beneath the optimism lingered painful memories. In Liberia, the older generation has not forgotten that Burkina Faso once supported Charles Taylor during the brutal civil wars. The wounds of the 1990s still haunt families who lost loved ones. For them, seeing Liberia now embrace Burkina Faso felt like betrayal, or perhaps like forgiveness too soon. Yet others saw it as a sign of maturity, the ability to move past bloodstains toward common ground. One Liberian pastor captured the mood in a Sunday sermon: "If enemies of yesterday can stand as brothers today, then perhaps there is hope for our children tomorrow." In the corridors of power, the decision was more strategic. For President Joseph Boakai, aligning with Traoré strengthened his domestic image as a leader willing to challenge old dependencies. But it also risked alienating Western backers whose aid Liberia still relies on. In Burkina Faso, the alliance bolstered Traoré's standing as not just a Sahel leader, but a continental one. His critics in the West may call him a dictator, but each new partnership with an African neighbor makes it harder to ignore his legitimacy. Yet the risks were undeniable. By leaning toward Traoré, Liberia risked economic pressure from Western donors. Already, whispers circulated that aid packages could be delayed, investment deals quietly frozen. And within Liberia itself, the opposition warned that Boakai was gambling with the nation's future. Some accused him of dragging the country into alliances that could trigger sanctions or destabilize relations with ECOWAS. Still, among the youth, the prevailing mood was defiance. They argued that dependence had never brought true stability, only cycles of aid, debt, and disappointment. So the question remains: is this bold partnership the key to breaking free from dependency, or will it spark a backlash that pushes Liberia back into the chaos of old? The answer may not come in speeches or headlines, but in the daily lives of farmers, workers, and families who must live with the consequences. In Washington, the alarms were not just political, they were strategic. Liberia was never supposed to drift this far from America's orbit. For over a century, Monrovia had been a dependable ally, a foothold for U.S. influence on the Atlantic coast of Africa. Now, that ally was openly courting Ibrahim Traore, a man the State Department quietly labeled as one of the most disruptive leaders in the Sahel. Analysts inside the Pentagon drew chilling scenarios. If Liberia could defy Washington, what about Sierra Leone? What about Guinea? Would a chain reaction unfold, pulling America's historic partners into the orbit of the AES? For U.S. generals, this was more than diplomacy. It was a security threat. Losing West Africa's Atlantic coast could compromise trade routes, intelligence operations, and even counterterrorism campaigns across the region. Meanwhile, European capitals echoed the concern. In Paris, Officials fumed. Traoré had already humiliated France by forcing its troops out of Burkina Faso in 2023. Now, watching Liberia, a country once seen as pro-Western, seek his endorsement felt like a dangerous vindication of his anti-colonial stance. One French diplomat admitted privately, "If Traoré can win over Liberia, then no one is safe from his influence." But not every world power was worried. In Moscow, the move was celebrated. Russian state media praised Liberia's outreach as proof that Africa is rejecting Western domination. In Ankara, Turkish officials hinted at possible support for Liberia's infrastructure projects. Even Beijing, though cautious, welcomed the development as another crack in the Western-led order. The African Union, caught in the middle, struggled to respond. Some member states called for unity and warned against deepening divides between ECOWAS and AES. Others quietly admired Liberia's boldness, whispering that this could be the start of a Pan-African realignment. And so, Liberia found itself at the center of a global storm. To its leaders, it was a chance to elevate their country, to claim dignity on the world stage. To Washington and Paris, it was betrayal. To Moscow and Ankara, it was opportunity. But here's the question no one can ignore. Is Liberia simply chasing a UN seat? Or has it triggered a geopolitical shift that could redraw Africa's map of alliances for decades to come? And if that shift continues, will America stand by or step in? Liberia's decision to seek Ibrahim Traoré's support may have begun as a diplomatic maneuver, but it has now evolved into something far greater. It is a declaration, a signal that Africa is no longer content to sit silently at the margins of global power. But bold declarations come with dangerous consequences. The long-term risks are clear. By aligning with Burkina Faso and the AES, Liberia risks losing Western aid that still feeds its economy. It risks sanctions, delays in investment, and the quiet retaliation of powerful allies who feel betrayed. History shows that when small nations step out of line, the consequences can be severe. And yet, the potential rewards are just as real. If Liberia holds its course, it may help carve out a new era of Pan-African sovereignty, where African nations invest in each other, defend each other, and no longer bow before foreign masters. This vision is what excites the youth, inspires the marches, and gives hope to those who have long felt ignored by the global order. The choice, then, is stark. Will Liberia's gamble be remembered as the moment Africa rose to speak with its own voice? Or will it be remembered as a reckless step that invited chaos, sanctions, and instability? For America, the question is equally sharp. Will Washington accept Africa's new independence? Or will it respond with the same old tools of pressure and control? And for the people of Liberia, the farmers, the port workers, the students marching through Monrovia, this choice is not abstract. It will shape their daily lives, their hopes, their future. So we are left with a haunting question. Is Ibrahim Traoré Africa's great hope, or its greatest risk? If you believe nations, like people, are called to walk with dignity and faith, then this story is not just about politics. It is about justice. It is about legacy. And it is about whether Africa, after centuries of struggle, can finally rise united. Because sometimes, the real victory is not in the seat you win, but in the unity you forge along the way. Thank you for watching until the end. If this story moved you, share your thoughts in the comments. Your voice matters. And if you want more stories of justice, faith, and truth from Africa and beyond, support this channel by liking, subscribing, and staying with us. Together, we keep these conversations alive.